Welcome to Order Militaris Radio TV, and we're lifelong Catholics. And what we do is all for free, and for our love of Jesus Christ, and for our Holy Mother, the Church. And we'll defend our Holy Mother, the Church. We are coming back with another amazing piece of investigation and writing by Mr. Adam Lebor, where he tells his experience in the Bosnian War. It began for him in the summer of '92 when he was in Zagreb, Croatia, and he gave the UN his credentials when he worked at the Times in London, and they gave him the press badge for the United Nations. So him and his fellow journalists left Croatia for a 40-some minute flight to Sarajevo, Bosnia. And we welcome Brother Alexis to the program.
Thank you, AJ, for having me on Order Militaris Radio TV, which is your unique apostolate, where we talk about all things in the light of Christ. And, well, we're both members of Order Militaris Catholicus, which is an international association of Catholics for the defense of Catholics and Christians who are persecuted for their faith. So talking about modern day religious conflicts, or especially ones in which Christians were genocided on vast scales, is something to which AJ and I are very sensitive and very interested, of course. Studying each of these events help us understand what's going on in the modern world and how to respond to it as best our organization can. We're a private initiative. We're not funded by the government. We don't take government grants. We don't work for government agencies or NGOs. But on this channel, which is AJ's Apostolate, it's not an official channel of our order or anything, AJ has done lots of investigative reports, and he has done a whole series on the Bank of International Settlements by Lebor, using Adam Lebor's book. This is what led AJ to talk about this topic, which is the UN's participation in diverse genocides around the world, and was these all accidents or whether they're deliberate. This was Adam Lebor's reason for writing his book. So most of you probably are too young to remember the Bosnian War, or the wars after the breakup of Yugoslavia. First comes the apparitions of Our Lady of Majorca peace, and that was very much promoted by the CIA. We covered that in a recent show. And then the whole country broke up in war. Who started that war? And what was it all about? These are important questions, and this is an important modern history that's not taught in public schools. So if you're homeschoolers, this is going to be a series to watch for those at the high school level. So you started us in medias res, AJ, in the old Homeric style, right, to tell us in the middle of the action what's going on. And so I'll try to follow you with some questions. So what year are we in first?
1992.
1992, and all hell is ready to break out. And so Mr. Lebor is on this plane to Sarajevo. What was his and his fellow reporters' impressions when they left Croatia for Bosnia? What was their expectations of what they were going to end up in?
So they were on the UN relief flight, and it was called Maybe Airlines. And they were carrying 10 tons of food and aid supplies, and several of the journalists cracking bad jokes to disguise their nervousness. They flew high over the jagged Croatian coastline, its islands. Then, as they climbed down onto the tarmac, the blue-helmeted UN soldiers ordered them to leave the area immediately. They were already hearing sounds of artillery fire. The machine guns are rattling, and the airport was just constantly under enemy Croatian, Serbian troopers under enemy fire. And so As they passed the UN checkpoint, the place where you would usually get your baggage and check everything was all wrecked and turned into rubble. And then he writes, I thought little of the UN checkpoint at the time, but over the next few days it began to bother me. Why was it there? On whose authority? Those without UN papers couldn't even get to the airport, let alone board a relief plane out. I was a British national, yet merely because I had a UN press pass, I could enter and leave Sarajevo at will. I was a war zone VIP. Bosnia-Herzegovina was a sovereign state and a member of the United Nations, yet that same United Nations was preventing Bosnian nationals from entering or leaving their own country. The Sarajevo airport was a kind of mini Bosnia itself. Bosnia Serbs were dug in at both ends of the runway, while the territory on either side was controlled by the Bosnian government. And the UN soldiers had night vision equipment. If they could not catch the runners, they illuminated them with the spotlights from their armored personnel carriers. Serb snipers and machine gunners immediately opened fire. Some of the runners were killed, but the wounded were picked up by the UN Pro 4 and taken to Kosovo Hospital in Sarajevo. When the international press in Sarajevo questioned UN spokesman about its actions against those trying to cross the runway, they said that the rules were set by the Security Council. Challenged about this claim and asked for details of the Security Council session, which stipulated that desperate women and children fleeing the besieged city must be lit up at night, UN spokesmen were unable to provide details. The UN Pro 4 then fielded a spokesman who could barely speak English to dodge difficult questions. The situation was aptly described by the American author and journalist Peter Maas, author of Love Thy Neighbor, as a psychotic vaudeville.
Now, here's a perfect example of how Masons run a situation. The narrative is one thing. We're here to protect the civilians, help them evacuate. But the reality is they're shooting the civilians who want to evacuate. Men, women and children at nighttime. And if an unarmed woman with children at nighttime is not going to risk getting shot unless she's under more risk of getting shot wherever she is. So to shoot at her is an act of absolute barbarity and cruelty. And yet it's the Security Council who made these decisions of the United Nations. So that's really strange. And did he find out any reason why, more than that, they weren't allowing refugees to flee? Or were they allowing them undercover to flee?
They weren't allowing them to leave. You just had to stay put in whatever place you were living. You couldn't, if you crossed into the airport area and try to get onto a relief plane, the lights would come on and you'd be dead.
Yeah, so this is a violation of the international rules of law of war, which require neutral parties to assist war refugees. You cannot force them to remain in a war zone where they'll be killed, because that is complicity in their death. That is an act of genocide of itself. You just can't do it. It's never been done in any previous war. I mean, look at all the refugees that are fleeing into Europe now and are accepted, and they're not even coming from war zones. Mm-hmm. So why is it that Muslims and Africans are allowed to enter the Europe and not coming from war zones, but here we have Europeans in their own country trying to flee and they weren't allowed?
Yeah.
So how did the UN keep the war in Bosnia going? I mean, is that what they're doing? Were they involved in activity? What's the real motive here?
Yeah, so when they brought in the aid, it went straight to the black market. So the United Nations declared itself neutral and impartial, but the UN Pro-Force actions at Sarajevo airport demonstrated that these were elastic concepts. In Bosnia, as in every war zone, the black market flourished, but this one was fed mainly by stolen United Nations supplies, some of which were looted by the UN soldiers themselves. There was no postal service or international telephone lines, so Sarah Havens passed letters to departing journalists to post them from outside the country. Um, yeah.
So now we see why they weren't allowing refugees to flee, because if the refugees fled, then there would be no more civilians around Sarajevo who would need supplies. And then the UN wouldn't be able to justify expenses for shipping in supplies, which they then gave to criminal organizations. So you can see there's a motive for their cruelty. And to kill people to maintain this kind of a scam is outrageous.
Yeah. The journalists soon learned to hide their friends' letters in their flak jackets to prevent them from being confiscated as contraband by the UN soldiers at the airport. The United Nations had paid a high price for the Serbs' permission for aid flights to land. It was helping administer the siege, and some UN officials even denied that Sarajevo was under siege. Instead, they claimed that the Serbs were merely in a tactical advantageous situation. The United Nations aid operation was keeping Bosnia alive, but whatever its intentions, the United Nations, I soon realized, was not the solution, but part of the problem.
Yeah, there's absolutely no reason to confiscate letters unless you're trying to control the narrative of what's actually going on.
Mm.
That's a war crime. That's more than locking people up in a war zone, not letting them out. That's to confiscate their letters. I mean, even in the Second World War, both sides allowed letters through the Red Cross to arrive at families and prisoners of war. This is outrageous. This is worse than you would be treated according to the laws of war in a concentration camp.
Yeah, so those involved in making the so-called rules was the Security Council. We'll learn a lot about these people later on, but the main folks who run the show are called the P5 or the Power Five. That's the United States, United Kingdom, Russia, France, and China at the time in 1992.
Okay, so just for those who don't know their geopolitics, the Serbs were backed by Russia. The Bosnians and are an indigenous people who have three different religions: Roman Catholic, Orthodox, Bosnian Orthodox, and Islamic. And they live in different parts of Bosnia, different heights and mountains, and it's a rather complex ethnic affair. And the basic geopolitics during the Bosnian War is the West wanted Yugoslavia to break up, balkanize it's called, into a lot of little states, because little states can be manipulated, and that's eventually what happened. Whereas the Serbs, who had dominated in Yugoslavia, which was basically given to them as reparations for World War I, even though the Croatians and Bosnians didn't start the war, it was the Serbs, it was the Austrians who started the war against the Serbs. They wanted to maintain the country united and under their control. And there's a lot of strong feelings about that among the Serbian people, even to this day. The Kosovo crisis followed the Bosnian War, and Kosovo used to be part of Serbia too. So these basic facts you've just related, AJ, show us that we need to take a deeper look at these UN's role in the Bosnian War and their culpability for the civilian casualties and the course of the war, because it just doesn't make any sense, these actions of shooting civilians that are fleeing, locking them in a war zone, giving their supplies over to the black market, and then confiscating their letters. That's not the action of a neutral power.
Yeah.
That is the action of some one who is collaborating in an act of genocide and yet trying to pretend they're not to.
Yeah. And I wanted to do this show also because the Armenians in Armenia and those in Artsakh and those in the diaspora, especially in the United States, are asking the UN to step in and do what they do, but they have no idea what they're asking for and who the UN really is.
Okay, so this is going to be a great program, and I'm looking. What do we have? What are we going to talk about in our next program?
So we're going to start getting to the meat and how the sausage is made, as they say in DC, on how the Security Council works. Who are these guys calling the shots in the Secretariat, the General Secretary, and also we get into the Polish lawyer, Mr. Limpkin, and his idea of what is the definition of genocide. Then we'll go back in time a little bit into the before the United Nations, which was called the League of Nations, and see who they let be genocided.
Okay, so now if the viewers want to follow along, what's this book that you're reading from, and how can they get it?
Yeah, so it's called Adam Lebor, Complicity with Evil, United Nations in the Age of Modern Genocide. It's linked in the show page where you can go get a copy on Amazon, and I also put the electronic copy on Internet Archive where you can sign up for a free account there and rent it for free and read it. And
Okay, so great. And Lebor is a great investigative journalist. And maybe if you put a link to your shows about his book on the BIS, the Bank of International Settlements. He is Jewish, but he's a truth teller. And we should always be willing to listen to truth tellers no matter where in the world they're from and what their background is. So thank you for having me on this program, Agate. I look forward to the other episodes because most of us don't know anything about the Bosnian War and what was involved. I think, too young. I never paid attention much. And it was before the age of the internet, so you really didn't know what was going on. So this will be a great program.
yeah. Thank you for watching today's episode of OMC Radio TV. If you wish to support OMC Radio TV, please join the studio fundraiser. More importantly, please join Ordo Militaris Catholicus as either a donor or an investor. That way, the important work of defending persecuted Christians can continue. Deus Volt.
Deus Volt.